we're both talking about generosity. And we're talking about generosity in the context of a series we're doing at the moment. So you might remember that we do like a series that runs for a whole year. And that series is about stories, images, myths from Buddhism. And we're doing a mini-series as part of that, which is looking at how enlightenment is expressed, manifested through different what are called mudras, which are the hand gestures that you'll see on different Buddhas. You'll see there are different ways, different hands that different Buddhas have. So this one at the back, for instance, is a particular Buddha who's touching the earth. And there's another Buddha who's called Ratnasambhava. And it's Ratnasambhava who particularly represents or manifests generosity. He's the Buddha of the south, the Buddha of the summer, of midday, of beauty, of abundance. He's a sort of yellow in colour. And he has his mudra is, let's just put these down. His mudra is, in his right hand, he's giving. So you might have seen Buddhas or pictures of Buddhas where they're giving like this. So it's the mudra of generosity. And in his left hand, which is on his lap, he holds a wish-fulfilling jewel. Okay? And in some ways, I think that generosity is the most magical of all wish-fulfilling jewels there is. And I suppose all of us look for kind of easy fixes. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'd love to find something really easy I could do that would make life much better. And of course, normally life's a bit harder than that. But the thing about generosity is actually it is that easy fix. It is that magic thing you've been looking for all this time. Generosity is that thing that will have immediate results. And because generosity is both the goal of the spiritual life and a path of the spiritual life. So, in what way is it the goal? It's the goal because when the Buddha became enlightened, in a way what he became was immensely generous. And he did that from a vision of the world in which he saw that we are interconnected in mysterious ways that people who aren't enlightened can't really see. Because we have an idea, if we're not enlightened, and I can't speak for anyone here, there may be people here who are enlightened, but if you're not, you kind of have this like idea that in your core there's this kind of separate self. You know, there might be bits of you that are affected by other people, but it kind of feels like there's a bit of you that is unique, that is boundaried, that keeps going, okay? And that is not particularly affected by what other things happen to you. But the Buddha saw right through that. He saw that actually there is no such part of you. It's just an idea we have, it's an illusion that we have, and we are very interconnected with all beings, all of us. You know, our bodies, our minds, however you divide our experience up, all of it is interconnected. And it's in fact a process, a movement of energy, really. And the Buddha saw that. And in that he saw that actually, well, just as, for instance, if I had a thorn in my foot, my hand would just take that thorn out, okay? It wouldn't think about it, because it's my foot, it's my hand. Why would I not take that thorn out? It's just on a kind of bigger level, that is how we are with all other beings in reality. So if another being is suffering, or another being needs something, well, we just naturally give it. That's how the Buddha was. He would just naturally give. You wouldn't think, that's them and I need to look after myself. You would be able to kind of go with a flow of generosity. And that's how the Buddha saw the world. And in fact, he very much lived his life from that radical approach. I mean, the Buddha, once he was enlightened, he didn't, set up some lovely big centre and have loads of people come and worship him and bring in lovely Rolls Royces or whatever the equivalent was at that time. He lived as a beggar. He lived as a tramp, and all he had was a begging bowl and his robes. He was homeless. He slept in ditches, and he didn't need to cling on to anything. He could actually be part of that flow. People gave him things, and then he taught whoever came to him. He wasn't stingy with his teaching. He didn't set up diplomas and all sorts of requirements you had to pass before you could hear the teachings. Whoever came to him, he would teach them. So the Buddha was very much acting from this kind of very radical understanding of generosity, that actually, just as I would not think a minute about pulling out the thorn from my foot, nor would he not think for a minute about giving to somebody. It would just be a natural thing to do. There would be no sense of, it's me giving this particular object to that person. Do you see what I mean? It's just like there is this flow that you're participating in. And for a person who's enlightened, generosity is not a chore, something that's a bit of a pain, you know, like you have to give something. You know, you don't think, from an enlightened perspective, you don't think, oh God, I really don't want to give that money to that charity, but I suppose I'd better. It's much more, it's a play. So for a Buddha, for a Bodhisattva, an enlightened being who sees reality as it really is, they are playing. So for them it's a joy, it's a pleasure to give. Generosity is a pleasurable thing to do because it's recognising how things really are, that we are deeply interconnected. And it's interesting that actually this figure Ratnasambhava, so some of these figures have what are known as consorts, or kind of female embodiments of what they represent. And his consort, Ratnasambhava's consort, was called Marmaki. I'll just write that out, actually. Okay, and Marmaki literally means mine maker, M-I-N-E, mine maker. So to her, everything belongs to her already. Okay? So it's not like, she, you know, the whole of everything is hers. And from that perspective, again, you can be tremendously generous because it's like you don't own anything, but you own everything. Okay? All of it. And I think that can be quite an interesting way of looking at things. I remember quite a few years ago now, actually, I went on a holiday to Jersey. And in Jersey, there were lots of lovely, lovely houses up on the hillside, looking out across the sea. They were just gorgeous. And I really, really craved having a house like that I could be in and I could, you know, this beautiful place. And I was actually, you know, I was thinking, God, I'd sit on the veranda, have a drink, look out the view, it would just be great. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm actually standing looking at the view at this particular moment in time. Why do I think I need to own a house to do that? Do you know what I mean? It was like I was having the experience of that view, enjoying it, and I was just adding stress to myself by thinking I needed to own it in some way, because there it was, I was experiencing it. And I think, you know, obviously in a much more kind of bigger way, that's how Marmaki Ratnasambhava see the world. It's like they already own it all, they can therefore be really generous. So generosity is the goal of the spiritual life. The Buddha is the embodiment of generosity. But it's also the path, okay, which is really interesting. In fact, it's seen as like, you know, talked about as being one of the basic Buddhist, the foundation of Buddhism is generosity. And there's a wonderful phrase which goes, you know, if you can't do anything else, you can always give. And that's really true from my experience, you know, that there might be times when I just can't meditate, I don't feel like I can pay particularly ethically, but I can always give. And there's something magical when I remember that and I turn around into giving mode, I break out of whatever it is that's been trapping me. So maybe I've been feeling very depressed, very anxious, and by moving into being able to be into giving mode, I break out of it. Yeah, I think it's because you can kind of be in two frames of mind, really, in any situation. So one can be, what can I get out of this? Okay? You can go to a place, meet a person, you can think, what can I get out of this situation? Or the other way you can think is, what can I give to this situation? And if you can think to yourself, what can I give to this situation, if you can remember that, and you can act from that place, somehow I find myself changing. I become much more like a kind of an active agent rather than a passive person waiting to be given something. I feel much less tight, much less greedy, and able to actually take in the whole situation, have a wider perspective as I think, what can I contribute to what's going on here? In fact, generosity can be a very good antidote, is an antidote to the 3 poisons. So people that were here when we talked about the wheel of life, you might have remembered right in the middle of the wheel of life, there's a cock and a pig and a snake that are kind of going around biting each other's tails. And what they represent are these 3 states of mind: greed, hatred, and delusion. And that's what drives us on in our suffering, really, in our ongoing unhappiness. And you can bring generosity to any of these. So if you bring, obviously generosity is a fantastic antidote to greed. Because instead of thinking, what can I get out of this, what can I get out of this, you start to think, what can I give? And it really changes how you are. I think that generosity can feel quite a scary thing to do. And actually, the more that we are a little bit generous now and then, the more we can see that actually it leads to really good states of mind, and then we can gradually build up to become more generous. So it helps us to move away from greed. Generosity can really help us to move away from hatred as well, actually, or just dislike, or just irritation. If you've ever been on an intermediate class, you'll remember the story about, if you can't do anything else, give a lettuce. Okay? So the story behind that is that it comes from a very old Tibetan tradition about, giving vegetables to people that you're having problems with. And somebody, actually she's not here, no she's not here, but anyway, somebody who often comes on a Tuesday did try it out. She was having a lot of problems with her colleague. The colleague was really irritating her. And she thought, right, I'm going to give her vegetables. So she gave her a lettuce, which I think the colleague was a bit astonished by. It was like, why have you given me a lettuce, you strange person? But they got talking, and they ended up going out for coffee, and they ended up then actually going for lunch together as well. And they became friends of a sort. So by giving to someone who you're having problems with, you can sometimes break right through, and you can realise that humanity that we all share, Even people you don't like have exactly the same kind of, needs and desires as we do. And I think it's also that whole thing about just in the act of generosity, you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, because you have to think, well, what would they like? And that in itself just takes you out of yourself, which is quite an interesting expression, actually. You get taken out of yourself, and you'll be brought in a place where you can actually take in what somebody else might want. Okay, so that's the how it can work with hatred, and it can also work as an antidote to delusion. And really, that's the same delusion I started off talking about. It's the delusion that we're not interconnected. It's the delusion that we're separate, that we have these separate selves. And generosity can really help to break that down, to see how we are very interconnected. And actually, on the other hand, to see how much we are benefiting all the time from other people giving to us, and how we just wouldn't be here if other people weren't giving to us all the time. And also, the other side of that is that, of course, everything that we do is really important. Because you might have kind of grown up with the kind of sense that actually it didn't really matter too much what you did. Okay, I certainly felt like this. Didn't really matter what I did. If I'm in a bit of a bad mood, doesn't really matter, because, who's going to notice what I do? But actually, it does really matter, because we are really interconnected. So all those times that we're in a particular negative state of mind or whatever, it is important. And I think generosity can be, a really good way to overcome that. Okay, so we've talked about... we're talking about how generosity is part of the path. And traditionally, on the path, there are 6 ways to give. And you'll probably come across these before, and I'm sure there are others as well, but the traditional ones from the Pali Canon somewhere are, first of all, material things. And of course, material things, money, really important thing to give. Time and energy. Now, time and energy, I think, sometimes we underestimate how important that can be to people. So we might feel that, we don't have much money, we can't give much money to people, but what we can give and what is really important to people is time and energy, particularly, I think, time to listen, time to really take people in, and just time to be interested in people, actually. That's a really important thing that we can do. The third thing traditionally is knowledge and expertise. So that would be, this actually comes from at the time of the Buddha, particularly certain types of religious knowledge were only meant to be understood by certain classes or castes in society. lots of other people were kept away from knowing about them. And because the Buddha blew that all up in the air, he said that everybody should have access to the knowledge. Everyone should have access to the Dharma and to other knowledge as well. So reading and writing, those kind of skills are very important. Another thing we can give is merit, which is a bit of a strange word, but what that really means is the kind of spiritual momentum, the positivity that we build up through practicing. So hopefully, if we're practicing, we're meditating, studying, taking part in the Sangha, we'll be gradually getting a little bit more positive, a little bit happier, perhaps. And it's what we do with that. And I wonder sometimes actually, at the moment, perhaps in business, there's a kind of like, I think, like mindfulness is proving very useful in lots of areas of life. And I wonder if using mindfulness to make loads of money and rip other people off is a bit of a misuse of merit. Do you see what I mean? That's not merit being given to other people. That's actually building up your own spiritual whatever so that you can then get more yourself, which isn't very good. The next one is life and limb. We can give life and limb. Well, which hopefully we don't actually have to do that very much here in Sheffield. Except maybe the people who painted up there did. I'm not quite sure. They got up there. But for some people, actually, this is pretty real. I was thinking, like, I've heard some stories about some of our kind of brothers and sisters in the Indian Sangha who have risked life and limb. People have stayed at retreat centres where other people, for different reasons, have been kind of attacking them, and they've got beaten up, and they've done that. Or quite a lot of women who want to practice the Dharma in India will put themselves under quite a lot of risk in order to do that. Well, of violence to themselves. So for some people, that is a real thing that they need to do, to give, to risk life and limb. Not so much for us. But I think it's also interesting to think that there probably are some people that you might risk your life and limb for, that you might give your life for your children or your partner. You might think, yes, I would give my kidney or whatever for that person. And then it's interesting to think about why there are some people you wouldn't do that to, and how you could maybe gradually broaden out to include more people into the group of people that you might be willing to give up your life and perhaps limbs for. And then last, but of course not least, is Dharma. That's another thing which traditionally the Buddha saw as being a very good way to give. And that doesn't mean just talking about the Dharma, like I am doing now. That means much more, all the contributing that people do to allow the Dharma to be manifested in the world. And because all what the Dharma is, of course, is like its reality. It's like what helps us to grow is the Dharma. So there are many ways that we can do this. So any way that we give to help this centre, but also any way we give maybe outside in our jobs, where we're just all with our families, where we're showing a slightly more ethical way of living, we're talking about perhaps some Dharma things but in different words, we are giving the Dharma then. So those are the 6 traditional ways that we can give. And I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but I just want to just briefly talk about, I think Sheffield Buddhist Centre is actually very much a manifestation, an embodiment of generosity. It's extraordinary that we have this huge, great place, and it has run on the generosity of people. And as you know, here in Sheffield we run a dana economy, so we run an economy which is, dana means generosity. It's based on giving. So we very much try not to run any kind of a transactional kind of thing here. Because that's how normally things work, isn't it? It's like, I give someone 20 quid and they teach me how to do something. Or I go and work somewhere and then they give me a salary in return for my hours, giving up my hours to them. It's transactional. Whereas here, it's much more about, hopefully, all of us contributing to create the Sangha here in whatever way we can, using, probably giving most of those things in some way. And, Amoghavamsa and I and some other people just went to Adhisthana, which is this new centre where Sangharachita, who is the founder of the movement, who Bodhidharma was just talking about celebrating his birthday, he's moved there. And it's going to be a kind of place where all his books that he's collected and his teachings will be based there, and hopefully kind of out from there his teachings will spread. And it is amazing. You know, it's this really huge place, hundreds and hundreds of bedrooms and things. It cost hardly any money for that kind of thing. And it has grown and been developed tremendously in the last 9 months or so. Again, just the generosity of individuals who've just come and lived there and painted it, decorated it, done loads of gardening, all that kind of stuff. Just like happens here, actually. It's that whole kind of sense of things working on generosity. And I know personally, I feel really different. If I'm giving to something because I want to be part of it and making it happen, I kind of feel like I own it, which is interesting. So it's like Marmaki and this whole idea of ownership, mind-making. It's like, because I'm able to contribute to Sheffield Buddhist Centre, well, it kind of feels like it's a bit mine, you know? It's all of ours, hopefully. Hopefully all of us feel a bit like it's mine as well. So Sheffield Buddhist Centre as a manifestation of generosity. And then I'm just going to hand over to Amoghavamsa in a minute, who is also a manifestation of generosity, I think. Building you up here.
More.
So there's, I think for me, Amoghavamsa has always been an embodiment and a kind of exemplar of generosity that I try to follow. So for some time, I'm not sure if he does it now, there's been various things that he's done, like I've heard about. I don't know if they're just anecdotal actually, or if they're real. But anyway, for instance, if you say to Amoghavamsa that you like something that he's got, he will give it to you quite often. That's true? Okay. And so don't, you know, if you like his shirt...
After the talk.
Also, a really nice thing actually that Terry talked about in one of her talks was that when he goes to buy a chocolate bar for himself, you also buy one for somebody else, which I really like. It's just a really simple thing you can do that's breaking down, because that can feel really grasping, can't it, that buying a chocolate bar for me. But if at the same time you buy someone to give someone else, there's something really freeing about that. And what I've particularly, though, really enjoyed about Amoghavamsa, he's so generous with his time and his energy. So when he talks to me, I feel like he's really talking just to me, and he's got lots of time for me as well. So, thank you.
Well, I don't do this very often, but I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you, Satyajyoti, for that big up. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can take the practice of generosity further. But in a way, as an introduction, I'll talk a little bit about myself, just a little bit. I see Buddhism, it's like a buffet. And a buffet, you go for the things that you're familiar with, and you eat those, and you also have a little nibble at the more exotic things. Yeah? So in a way, generosity is it's quite a familiar thing here now, and it's good to practice it. But it's also good to try some more exotic things, and it's sort of, in a way, it works in terms of how I've got involved in Buddhism, because I meditate every day, but I'm not going to sit on the cushion for 8 hours and that sort of thing. I can't do that. But I've got a reasonable meditation practice, but I don't find getting concentrated very easy. It took me a long time to get interested in pujas, a long time, but I like it now. Study groups were always a bit of a challenge. I'm all right one-to-one, but in groups I can find, I used to find those quite difficult. What else? And sometimes my ethics can be a bit iffy. So what, you might say, well, what does that leave then? As Satyajyoti said, I practice a lot of generosity. I'm very keen on developing friendships, and very, very keen on setting up Buddhist environments. Environments where people can practice, basically. And that's like centres, communities, businesses, anything like that, where Buddhists can get together and go deeper. So there's a little quote from Sangha Night. You may not be morally scrupulous, you may not be able to meditate even for 5 minutes, you may not pick up a Buddhist book from one year to the next, but if you aspire to any sort of higher life, then at the very least you will give. Then there is some hope for you, and that is the message of the Buddha. So in a way, that's a sort of bedrock of practice. If you can't do all these wonderful highfalutin things, you can always sort of get down to the sort of basement and give, as it were. But actually it's not the basement. So it took me quite a while to get used to this idea of generosity. I mean, I moved down to Norwich because there wasn't centres around here, and they were always banging on about generosity. And I thought, well, they would do, they want my money, don't they? And the first time I actually got a sense of how marvellous generosity was, I went on my very first Vajraloka retreat. And in those days, Vajraloka was like brown rice and silence, basically. And I thought, this is going to be tough. So I took a bag of sweets with me. Because the nearest shop, I mean, forget about it, it's just sheep, And so I was struggling, and of course I got me a bag of sweets, so I was all right, I could, enjoy myself a little bit. And then I was really struggling, and I remember just sort of looking up and seeing this guy who was obviously struggling more than me. And I thought, well, I know what I'll do, I'll give him a sweet. And it just completely transformed him. I mean, just giving him this, I think it's a humbug or something. And he obviously cheered up, and then I thought, well, actually, I'm really enjoying giving this sweet, and I just, in a way, it got me out of my sort of slough of despond. So I won't mention about vegetables, because you've done the vegetables, that's good. So 6 years ago, I handed over the chair to Suryamati. So Suryamati is now the chair here. And I suddenly had lots of space and freedom, because being a chair is a bit of a challenge. And I went on a 3-month retreat at Gukulaoka. And in a way, Gukulaoka is a bit like Vajraloka without the sheep, really. So I had lots of time, and I may as well meditate. I mean, there's nothing much else to do, really. You can wander around, and I started to do a bit of study, and I picked up, I like biography, and I picked this 3-fat book up called, The Great Disciples of the Buddha. I can really recommend it. And in it was Visaka. This is a woman, Visaka, and she was called the chief patroness of the Buddha. Chief patroness of the Buddha. And she lived at a place called Shravasti. And we went to Shravasti in 2011 on the Sheffield pilgrimage, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And you can actually see the old city of Shravasti. It's sort of like mounds of earth and goats and things. I mean, the city's just completely disappeared. But they're the sites of where Visaka set up a park for the Sangha. And there's also the site of where another very rich and generous person gave, he was called Anarta Pindika, and he gave Jeta Grove. And if you read the Pali Canon, that's the sort of discourses of the Buddha. Quite often it says the Buddha was staying at Shravasti, because he stayed there for 3 months in the rainy seasons for about 20 years. So if you lived in Shravasti at that time, you got a good chance of bumping into the Buddha, because he used to go into Shravasti for his alms round, and then he used to give teachings. So there's lots and lots of teachings that talk about Shravasti. And at that time, it was a very, very important crossroads, north, south, east, west, big trading place, big river, everything. And now it's sort of, well, there's no river, and it's a sort of dusty few tracks, and it's brilliant, actually. It's really good, really nice, really quiet. You can meditate there. So, so there we go. Where are we now? Yes, okay. So let's get back to Visaka. Well, she had a great starting life. She was a rich family. She married the treasurer of the city, the king of the city. So he was really rich, so he had loads of money. And of course she got the Buddha on her doorstep, giving lots of teachings. Her parents were Buddhists. So, I mean, you know, she had a very good start in life. And she, the story says she had 20 children and lived to 120 years old, and when she was 120, she looked like she was a 16-year-old. Well, you know, it's... Anyway, she was very fortunate, very fortunate. And apparently, according to the tradition, she became what's called a stream entrant at 7 years old after listening to the Buddha. And a stream entrant is something like, progress to awakening is inevitable, basically, if you become a stream entrant. So she lived a very virtuous life, and she was very, very generous. And she gave lots of, they didn't need much really. So, I mean, like she gave clothes and food and shelter and somewhere to live and medicine, very sort of basic things. And she wanted to make sure that what she was giving to the Buddha was appropriate. To the Buddha and the Sangha was appropriate. Because sometimes you can give stuff to people and actually it's not what they needed. So she wanted to make sure she was being, you know, quite clear and careful about what she gave. So she said what she wanted to give, and the Buddha said, the Buddha said, that's fine, you can do that, you can give those simple things. And then he said, why do you want to give? Which is quite an interesting question, really. Why do you want to give? And Visaka, she said, I've got two reasons for giving. One is that it's going to help people, and it's going to help them get on with their practice and help them go out so they can go out and teach and study and meditate and help people around them. So that's one of the reasons. So they didn't have to cultivate fields and, you know, whatever they would have had to do otherwise. And the other reason was what she called an inner reason, which would help with her inner practice. Inner reason. And this inner reason was to help her with her practice of remembering and reflecting. So it's very good to be generous, but it's even more marvellous if you actually reflect on your generous activity, on your own generosity. So she lived at Shravasti, busy city, lots of Buddhists coming and going, very thriving Buddhist community. And so she would she would hear all the sort of Buddhist gossip and Buddhist news. So-and-so's going out on a teaching tour, somebody's coming, just arrived from somewhere. And when she heard about all these people doing all these things, she would reflect and remember that she'd probably given them a robe. She'd probably given them sort of a bowl of food. She'd probably helped them with their sort of place to live and so on. And she would then reflect on that generosity. And that would take her into a more concentrated state. So what I want you to do is just close your eyes. For a couple of minutes, I want you to just think about a time in the past when you were generous or when somebody was generous to you. And just go back to that time and what it felt like, what you were doing, what you gave. who the other person was. And what does it feel like to be reflecting on generosity? Either your generosity to somebody or somebody's generosity to you. So maybe you could just come back into the room and open your eyes. And what I'd like you to do, this is just anyway a bit of a taster, maybe you could talk about this in the groups more, but what I'd like you to do, just for a couple of minutes, so it's a minute each, is find a partner or a threesome and just talk about what it felt like to reflect on your generosity or somebody being generous to you. So just turn to a friendly face and just talk about it. There you go. Okay, so it's a little brief taster. I'd like more time, but we're a bit... It's okay, so... does anybody feel glad?
Yes.
Anybody feel glad?
Yes.
Yeah? Anybody feel glad? Yeah? Anybody feel... happy?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh, it might work then. Oh, okay. So this is, in a way, what we call a spiral path to more and more positive states of mind, states of being. So, and it starts off with remembering and reflecting on your generosity. So I'll just quote a little bit from the Pali Canon, okay? Remembering and reflecting on these generous actions, I shall feel glad. When I feel glad, I shall be happy. When my mind is happy, my body shall be tranquil. When my body is tranquil, I shall feel pleasure. When I feel pleasure, my mind will be concentrated. So a spiral path from reflecting on your generous activity or people being generous towards you to concentration. And the posh name for concentration is samadhi. Samadhi. Okay? And samadhi is the gateway to wisdom. It's a gateway to insight. It's a gateway to jhana. It's a gateway to all sorts of possibilities, basically. It's like a launching whatever thing. I just did a launching thing. So, samadhi, it's not concentration in an exam, swatting, knit your brow, grit your teeth, whatever sort of thing. So it's about bringing your energies into a whole. Where have I got this pen? Bringing your energies into a whole. Letting your energies gather together. It's like all your energies flowing in one direction, flowing in one channel. Not forcing your mind, it's the natural outcome of enjoyment, of pleasure and of calm. And there's a verse that we keep trotting out from the Dhammapada, and it's one of my favourites. It's the 80th verse. Irrigators channel water, fletchers straighten arrows, carpenters shape wood, the spiritually mature train their minds. The spiritually mature can concentrate their energy, focus their energy to flow in one direction. A little quote from Sangha. A happy person is a concentrated person. A concentrated person is a happy person. When we are distracted, we can't stay still. We go searching for this and that. We aren't happy. But when we're truly happy, we don't need anything else at all. So, as I've said, samadhi is, or concentration, is the gateway to wisdom. And it's a natural outflow, a natural outcome of reflecting on skillful action. And it's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever watched these 1930s sort of Hollywood films. Busby Berkeley and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, they have these things called champagne fountains, which is basically this whole tower of champagne glasses. And you sort of pour champagne at the top, and the top glass fills up, and then the next row of glasses fill up, and then the next row of glasses, and anyway, everyone gets drunk. But anyway, forget about that about the analogy. In a way, what we're doing here, we're sort of pouring in reflection of generosity, and that then builds up to feeling glad, and then it goes on and on and on and on. So in a way, you're like this sort of bubbly whatever thing, sort of thing, this champagne fountain. Maybe it didn't work for some people. I love that one anyway. So where are we? Champagne fountain, done that, yes. So it's not a matter of forcing your mind. It's just dwell on generous actions. Being generous without reflecting on your generosity is very good, but it's like having a woodshed stacked with wood that you never burn. You never get the full benefit. I mean, traditionally you get warm from chopping wood, don't you? But you can also get warm from burning it. So in a way, you get warm from being generous, but you could go, you could, whatever. Don't waste your generosity. So I'll just finish with a little quotation from the Anguttara Nikaya. Palikana, another one. And then after that, we'll have groups in the normal place. We'll have the men here, the women will meet in the bookshop. There'll be a newcomers group from the last course in the green room at the front of the... it's a long way away, isn't it? It's not over there somewhere. And then I'll have a mixed group in the red shrine room. So, quote from Anguttara. Oh, and the question is... What was the question? I've forgotten.
Your experience of generosity, carrying on from that exercise.
Did you hear that?
So it's about your experience of being generous and of receiving generosity as well. So maybe carrying on the discussion that you're having with your partner when you just did that exercise.
Thank you very much, that's great. Okay. So Anguttara Nikaya. A noble disciple recollects his or her generosity thus. It is a great gain for me, it is well gained for me, that in a people obsessed by the stain of stinginess, I dwell at home with a mind devoid of the stain of stinginess, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in relinquishment, one devoted to charity, delighted in giving and sharing. When a noble disciple recollects his or her own generosity thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred or delusion. Their mind is straight, with generosity as its object. This is called a noble disciple who dwells amid an uneven people, who dwells without afflicted mind amid an afflicted people, who enters upon the stream of the Dharma and develops recollection of generosity. A noble disciple who has arrived at the fruit and understands the teaching often dwells in this way. So, carry on being generous and carry on reflecting about it. And what we'll do now, we'll divide into groups and talk about things.